Hello and welcome to Keep Talking, a community dialogue about mental health. This is a collaboration between Brattleboro Area Television and the Brattleboro Retreat. My name is Gay Maxwell. I'm the manager of the Office of Continuing Education at the Brattleboro Retreat. And the Office of Continuing Education has been around since about 1979. It brings experts in the fields of mental health and in addictions to the retreat for full-day conferences. We have as many as 30 full-day conferences a year. And we bring those experts to audiences of other mental health professionals who are really looking for new theory, new ideas, consolidation, ways to work with clients that will better their practice. And we're really lucky that tomorrow we have Dr. Patricia Mulready, who is going to be presenting to about 80 mental health professionals from all over New England tomorrow. And she's going to be presenting a program called Nutrition, Altering the Neurobiology of Addiction and Mental Illness. And I'm really thrilled to have you here today, and I really appreciate your taking the time to do this program.
I'm just pleased to be here.
In addition to doing a whole conference tomorrow, which takes a lot of energy. But I'm thrilled to have you here. And you have an interesting story to begin with, which is one of the things that I was really interested to read about when I did my homework about you, is that you, as a woman of our generation, you ran into a roadblock on you wanted to be a doctor. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Back when I was in high school, mostly boys became doctors, but I wanted to be a doctor because I thought this blends my nosiness, need to know the answer to everything, and helping people. But when I presented my idea to my family doctor, he said to me, well, you better find something else to do, because even if you got into medical school, no residency would take you because you're a girl. Mm. And I don't come from a family of doctors, so my parents said, go find something else to do. So I did. And that brought me into the mental health field. So I studied psychology and graduated, worked in addictions, and then I studied nutrition on my own, and I finally said, you know what? I just don't know enough about biology. I don't think the people I'm seeing are necessarily having mental health issues. I think they're physically sick. Mm-hmm. No doctor in the neighborhood would agree with me, so I went to medical school.
Wow, and so your experience of being an addictions counselor only stoked the fire even more.
It did.
And you even ran into obstacles of like, I've got to get myself in.
Yes.
But you did it.
I did it. I applied when I was 25. No, I didn't apply. I actually inquired, and they said, well, you're too old.
When you were 25?
When I was 25. Mm. And I said, well, this time I didn't go, oh, well, I got mad. So I took all my pre-med courses at night after work, and at 35 I got accepted.
Wow, so 10 years.
10 years. Took me 10 years to get all the biology under my belt, because I had none. Mm-hmm. And then I said, here I am. And I went to medical school knowing that I wanted to practice what I had learned in addictions, which is body, mind, spirit. Mm-hmm. That to me is what holism is about. You can't treat one piece and not the other, because they're all intertwined together. And so I went to medical school. I learned what I needed to do. They let me out, and here I am.
And here you are. And tomorrow you'll be giving other people an idea of what your holistic approach is to the interconnectedness of mind, body, spirit. And maybe to start, would you explain what holism means to you? Because I think people have a lot of different ideas about holistic. What does that mean?
Lots of times when people say holistic, they're really meaning alternative medicine, such as herbs or energy work or gemstones, whatever people include in that. When I talk about holism, I'm actually talking about how does your body interact with your mind and interact with your spirit. And any one of those places can be wobbly, and if they're wobbly, you don't feel well. Mm-hmm. So when I see people and when I talk to people, the place for me to start is the body. Now, most of the people we're going to talk to tomorrow, their training is all in the mind. Mm-hmm. And that's what my training was in the beginning, and that's when I said, that's not right, that's not enough. So that's when I learned the nutritional components of things, the biological, the neurotransmitters, all the stuff we're going to talk about tomorrow, if we start in the body and we make that as strong as we can, then there's the possibility there is no mental health problem. I have actually seen people who had 20 years of depression. They tried all medications, they did everything they could think of. I changed their diet. How long do you think it took for them to feel better?
I don't know.
2 days.
My goodness.
2 days. Because it was all biology. Same with anxiety. If the body chemistry is really off, those are two of the prime conditions that people experience, and then if they see a mental health professional, that's what they get labeled as, depression or anxiety. It may be in the body. Now, there's other people who have those conditions and more, bipolar, schizophrenia, and so on. If we get the body strong, then the mind, the brain is stable as it can be, and then we can work with people's minds to teach them skills, to teach them how to cope and all that. Sometimes, as you well know at Brattleboro Retreat, sometimes to stabilize the brain, you do need to use medications. And I'm not opposed to medications. I prefer to start with a nutrition base to see what we've got and then move from there. But some people need to have the medications to stabilize what they don't naturally produce. And then there's the whole spiritual component. I call that the glue, because it kind of glues everything together. And when I talk about spirituality, what I'm really talking about is what gives you a meaning to life? Why do you feel good about being here? If you don't feel good, then we need to tune up your spiritual life a little bit. It's not religion.
I see.
Yeah, it's not religion. Religion is a whole separate thing, equally as valuable for some people, but spirituality is all-inclusive. Everybody has a spiritual life.
So it sounds like everybody can use looking at their relationship to mind, body, spirit, in relationship to their resilience in the world, in a very stressful world, and also if they do have health issues that they struggle with, whether they're depression, whether they're things that we think of more as medical,
Diabetes, high blood pressure.
Exactly, and but that all of us can do with really examining that, and that's why I wanted you here today to talk to the BCT audience, BCTV audience, because I felt like this applies to everybody.
It does. It really does. I mean, people come to me and say, "Oh, I eat really well, doc." I say, "Okay, so tell me what you eat." And then they list all this stuff, and I say, "That's terrible." Really? The hardest part is there's such confusing information out there. And I go to the store and I see people chewing their fingernails trying to figure out what should they buy. And sometimes I can't help myself. I go up and say, "Buy that. It's good for you."
So what are the most common complaints that people come into your office with? And maybe you could give us a couple examples of how you look at those and what questions you might ask.
Okay. Depression is one, and some people come in never having used medications. Some people come in on medications and don't feel well or want to get off, and I never take people off medications until we have good nutritional background and consultation with the person who prescribed it. You just don't say, "Oh, we'll just throw that away," because the brain has adjusted to that. And some people have tried medications and they haven't worked for them. So the first thing I always think about is, what do we need to do in terms of food for you? And the thing that people often don't like to eat, because first it's expensive, and two, it doesn't necessarily taste good if you don't know how to cook it, is protein. And protein is meat, fish, chicken, eggs, tofu, things of that sort. That is so important to physical health as well as mental health, because that's the building blocks to make all our brain chemistry. There's a few exceptions which are more fat-based, but many people are lacking protein. It's like, how on earth do you think you're going to get better if you don't put in what your body needs?
So protein can really have a big impact on
Very
mood,
much so.
You're saying.
Yeah, very much so. And in fact, when I described the person who had 20 years of depression, that's what I did for them. I said, you need to eat protein in this way, 2 days.
And how much protein were you, can you eat too much protein?
Yes, you can. Protein is hard on the kidneys. And the protein should be, and it also depends on the type of protein. Okay? Some people process food very quickly, and some people process food very slowly. People who process food very quickly need to eat more protein than the people who process it slowly. Okay? So if someone is a slow processor, then they can eat a lot more carbohydrates, because here's how the body works. It's fuel. Carbohydrates are your fast fuel. Protein is your intermediate fuel, and fat is your longest fuel. You want to have all three available to the body because you don't want to constantly eat all day long. Some people may like that, but trust me, it's not fun. So people who process slowly can eat more carbohydrates because their body goes through it more slowly. They won't feel particularly well on protein, high levels of protein, because it'll sort of sit in their stomach longer. But they still need protein, but the kind of protein they would eat would be chicken breast or light white fish, things of that sort. They would not feel as well typically on beef. Okay? The fast processors, on the other hand, feel better on beef and chicken and lamb and the greasy fish like salmon, because their body goes through it very quickly. They feel terrible on pizza and pasta and just all carbohydrate foods. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does make sense to me, yeah. So depression is one issue that you see people walking into your office with.
Right.
And you had mentioned in our previous conversations also seeing older adults and what they struggle with. Osteoporosis, for instance, being something. And can osteoporosis have an impact on things like mood or maybe just feeling lousy because you're struggling with such a lousy diagnosis?
Right.
Yeah.
It's frightening to women, and men get osteoporosis too. But women go into menopause sooner than men, so people tend to think of estrogen and progesterone as just, oh, that's sex stuff. It really isn't. It's part of our whole body chemistry. And men have their body chemistry and testosterone. Women start to lose that structure around 50 years old. So women go into menopause much sooner than men go into andropause, which is late 60s, early 70s.
Andropause, that's A-N-D-R-O-P.
P-A-U-S-E.
Andropause, okay.
Yeah. Testosterone is an androgen, so that's where it gets the name andropause.
I see.
Yeah. So one of the things that people are often told by the doctor is to take calcium so that you don't get osteoporosis. One of the big mistakes is that you need to take magnesium and calcium to make calcium go to the bones, so that the calcium doesn't get deposited in your arteries or in your soft tissue.
I see.
So you want to take, typically it's half the amount of magnesium to what you would take for calcium. Some people say 1 to 1, it's whatever. Vitamin D is very important for bone health. And the farther north you go, the more vitamin D you need, because today is very warm, but typically in Vermont,
I was going to say, how much vitamin D do Vermonters need?
You're not out in your bathing suit in the middle of winter, typically. We don't do that in Connecticut either.
Right.
The average is about 1,000 international units a day. Canada recommends 2,000 international units, so it depends where you live in Vermont, basically.
I see.
The farther north you go, the less sun you get.
Interesting.
And that's the best way to get your vitamin D.
Can you be tested for vitamin D?
Yes, absolutely. It's a blood test.
Oh.
Yeah,
okay.
Your doctor can do it, your gynecologist can do it. And the type of vitamin D you want to make sure you take is vitamin D3, not D2. D2 doesn't work very well.
It doesn't?
No.
Okay.
So D3 is important.
So you must look at so many people's diets, so many people's, and I'm sure there's tremendous variance in people's diets. What if you could rule the world? All right,
look out.
All right, okay. Yes, if you could rule the world, what would be the sweeping changes in diet that you would make? Maybe some building blocks for people.
Okay. First thing, I would ask people not to eat food with preservatives or dyes, artificial flavors, even natural flavors, which you think to yourself, well, that's better. By the time it starts with this natural product and gets over to the food, it's not so natural anymore. The problem is our bodies are really cave people bodies. And cave people didn't have those chemicals, so the body doesn't know what to do with it. So our poor liver is working very, very hard to get rid of all that junk because the liver processes it so that we don't stay sick. So that's number one. Number two, I would ask people to limit the amount of refined carbohydrates they eat. That means white bread, white flour, white sugar, because that turns into sugar very, very quickly. And then that causes insulin, which has to take care of sugar to put it into our bodies for energy, makes it overproduce. And then everybody's starting to walk around with big fat bellies looking like Alfred Hitchcock, if you remember who he is.
I do.
And that's a sign that the insulin and the sugar's off. Even if the doctor tests and so your sugar is good, that's a sign you're headed for trouble.
A belly.
Big belly.
Yeah.
Big belly. Now, women in menopausal years get a little bit of a belly. But when you start, seeing your belly enter the room before you do, you're in trouble.
I see.
So that's one other thing. That is causing so much health problems in our country.
That's a tricky one, though, because I think most people think to themselves, "Oh boy, sugar! It always makes me feel good."
It does.
And so there's that immediate gratification of sugar,
Right.
and obviously it must have an impact on. I mean, if you're also seeing it in your practice in terms of resilience, in terms of recovery and mental health issues, it must have it must affect mood as well.
It does. Sugar binds to the same places in the brain that heroin does. That's why people feel good initially. The body has to use a lot of energy to process it, but at the end, there's nothing. If you ate a piece of fruit, or you ate some vegetables, or you ate a whole grain bread, the body takes the same energy to process it, but at the end, it has building blocks to make something else. If you ate Hostess cupcake, Little Debbie's, it tastes good, you feel good for a few minutes, and then the crash.
Because there's nothing there.
There's nothing there.
Yeah.
There's nothing there, except you start to put on the weight because you're interrupting the whole insulin sugar balance.
So for people that, I think sometimes people get intimidated by what is supposedly a good diet, because sometimes good diet to people means, oh, well, I'm going to have to spend a lot of money. I'm going to have to get all organic foods. I'm going to have to buy the expensive stuff at the farmer's market. It's intimidating.
Yes.
And do you have ideas for people that are on a limited budget but they want to eat well?
Right. Yeah, I have people that don't have a lot of money, and I also work with programs that serve people who are homeless and will, when they get out, maybe have a room to live in. So we look at that and we say, okay, so what is realistic? I'm all about realistic. I could create a wonderful diet for you, but if you can't afford it or you don't like it, you're not going to eat it.
Right.
So for people who don't have a lot of money to spend for food, the proteins that you can buy, one of the cheapest ones is eggs. Eggs is your complete protein. You can buy tuna on sale.
What about the flack about cholesterol, though? What do you think?
Well, God is very smart. Right in the egg yolk, which contains the cholesterol, he built a cholesterol buster, lecithin.
Ah, lecithin.
Lecithin. And part of the problem has been with the diet and the medical profession over the last 20, 30 years is a study comes out and then people take it as the truth when in fact it's like, oh, that's interesting. We need to investigate further. I guess it was in the 70s, eggs were terrible.
Oh, I remember.
Yeah, eggs aren't terrible. You don't need to eat tremendous numbers of them, but now if you're healthy, you can eat 2 eggs a day with not a problem, the medical establishment is saying, which is completely different from what they said 10 years ago. So you certainly have to work with your doctor if you have health issues, but part of the whole cholesterol issue is that the liver is not processing the cholesterol out properly, oftentimes because people are eating all refined junk food. that's creating an inability for the liver to work right. And when you add protein back in, things settle down lots of times and it eases out.
Wow. So I interrupted you
That's
just a
okay.
second ago. You were talking about foods that were easy, economical, and
Right.
you just mentioned eggs, and of course I rushed in with
Well, that's okay,
cholesterol,
but
you
that's
have
something
another-
everybody probably wants to know.
Right.
So tuna, particularly tuna in water, it doesn't have to be the albacore, but just tuna in water. Sardines. You can buy chicken in a can, but you can also, which is not ideal because it contains some chemicals that aren't great for you, but you can buy deli meat. It's protein. Now, is that the ideal thing to do? No, but if you start eating that way, you might start to feel better, and then you might be able to have more energy to prepare more fancier foods.
What whole grains do you recommend that people eat? Or?
Well, it depends. There's a big move to do gluten-free. And if you remove gluten, you remove a very large number of healthy grains. So the first thing I always suggest to people is, are you having trouble with gluten or are you having trouble with wheat? Because wheat and corn are and soy are two of the very highly allergic grains. So before I have people go gluten-free, I recommend go wheat-free and see if in fact you feel better. If you go gluten-free, you're also removing rice and oats and barley and spelt. Those are a lot of
Interesting.
grains.
I thought they were one and the same.
No,
Wheat and gluten-free.
no. Gluten is actually just a protein that glues the grains together when you bake a bread. You'll notice, did you ever make cornbread just with plain corn all crumpled all over? There's no gluten in it. Whereas wheat keeps it well glued together. And people are sometimes allergic to gluten, which means then you have to eliminate all gluten products. Or they're just allergic to a particular grain like wheat. So you can get a multi-grain bread that has lots of different grains in it if you're not allergic to any of the grains. Otherwise, and the thing you have to be careful of when you go and you see oatmeal bread, you go, oh, that's great, no wheat. The first ingredient is always wheat. So you have to read labels to make sure that you're not getting something that you're surprised at.
Yeah. So I have a question. We're going to need to end pretty soon.
Are we done already?
We're almost done. But I wanted to ask you about if you had advice to give to people in recovery about their diet. If in 25 words, or I'm not going to say 25 words or less, but what are the main pieces of advice you give to people who are in recovery and are in just those really hard beginning stages?
Okay. First thing I would ask people to do would be to eat protein. Eat as whole grain as you can if you're going to eat breads and crackers. Start learning to like your vegetables. And have a little bit of fat. That could mean some nuts. That could mean some olive oil on a salad. Not tons of it, but some. That's not eating pork rinds or potato chips, though. Now, the problem with people in the early days of recovery is that their bodies are struggling to normalize after being on drugs for a period of time. And they're craving sweets, and they're craving carbs. And that's the brain screaming. Because most people, I call it my abstinence triad. They want sugar, caffeine, and nicotine. All of those three things at a lower level are stimulating the same places in the brain that the drugs did. So in the beginning, okay, you can do that, but the goal should be within the first 6 months, those things should be a very minimal part of life. But in the beginning, it's very hard to give up all that stuff initially because it helps to get over the first cravings after stopping whatever drugs people were using.
You know, you mentioned fat. It's interesting to me that we've even in the time that I've been around, that fat has become less of an enemy, and that carbohydrates are more. People are more suspect about the kind of carbohydrates you eat as opposed to the kind of fat you eat, or how much fat you eat. Can you speak to that at all, or?
Everybody. All three of those things get a bad reputation somewhere. The idea is we need carbohydrates, we need protein, we need fat. Unless there's a very specific reason by someone who's very knowledgeable saying don't eat that, all of those need to be part of our diet. I had a woman come to me years and years ago before I knew a whole lot about nutrition, but I knew some things, and she was about 20 years old, a runner, trying to eat so healthy, low fat, no fat. She was skinny as a bone. She was losing her hair. Her skin was pasty. She felt sick, and she had no energy. And I said to her, you need to eat fat. 2 weeks later, she was fine.
Wow.
But I asked her to eat things like olive oil or nuts, you know, healthier
Things
fats.
like that.
Your body needs fat to build some very important things, including your sex hormones.
And on that incredibly high note,
We're going to end.
I'm so happy about that fat part.
Yes, yes.
We're going to end, but I really want to thank you
You're very
for
welcome.
taking the time to do this. This is an extra, and it's a lucky strike extra for us. So thank you, Dr. Patricia Mulready. And I want to plug Dr. Mulready's website, which is www.timetolivebetter.com. You can find an extraordinary amount of information. She has articles, ebooks, advice, there are forums, there's a lot of stuff and information that we obviously couldn't cram in here today. And I want to thank our studio audience for being with us today, and thanks again. And please come back and see Keep Talking once again. We'll be back with other programs. Thanks very much to the Brattleboro Community Television Organization. They make this possible for the retreat to do, and we're very grateful to them. Thanks.